I want to talk to you tonight to start the show about the playoff. But I don't want to go down any road of whether I like it or whether I approve of the expansion or what I think about the format. If you want to hear that, last couple of shows, that's for you. Now that we know the college football playoff is in all likelihood expanding, and we've got a pretty good gauge on what the format's going to be, I've looked across the college football media landscape, and I've listened to pretty much every take you could imagine on winners and losers. A lot of people have talked about, for example, what would the format look like? Take this 12-team format, apply it, reverse engineer it. What would last year look like? Jesse, I think, has a graphic as to the top 12 teams from last year. What would it have looked like? Would we have had Coastal Carolina or a couple of G5s, Coastal Carolina and Cincinnati in the playoff? That's all well and good. It's my personal opinion that you can't necessarily do that with 100% certainty, because as you're looking at the graphic Jesse's showing you right now, how do we know that people still would have voted Coastal Carolina 12 if they knew there was a playoff spot on the line for them? So anyway, that's just off in the ether. We don't know. We'll never know one way or the other. But there is one huge winner here. And there's a winner, I think, above and beyond even the SEC. I know a lot of folks look at the SEC and they say they're big winners because you did not put a cap on how many teams can make it from the same conference. And we're all speaking in hypotheticals. I assume this is all going to be passed. And that's all true. But that's not news to me. It's not news that Mike, or not Mike's live, now it's Greg Sankey. It's not news to me that Greg Sankey and the SEC are going to figure out a way to work the system to their advantage. It wouldn't happen if the SEC didn't put its stamp of approval on it, and the SEC is not going to put their stamp of approval on any system that doesn't give them a massive advantage. So yes, as you're looking at all the guidelines that Jesse's showing you there on the screen, yes, this is good for the SEC. Yes, it should be good for the ACC. It should be good for the Big Ten, for example. Yes, it should be. And I know that on top of that, there's been a lot of sentiment out there that I agree with. How could you disagree with anyone saying this is great for the G5? Yes, it's great for the G5, but you need to understand something. G5, that's like saying car. Well, what kind of car do you drive? What portions of the G5 are we talking about? Because the Mountain West ain't the AAC. And so this is what I want to do. I want to ask you, or anyone, I'm looking left and right, I'm looking at administrators, I'm looking at conference commissioners, I'm looking at television executives. Do you have any idea what you guys are about to do? Let me put it to you like this. Does anyone know who Mike Oresco is? I would venture to say 60% of our audience, maybe more, does not know who Mike Oresco is. Well, that is the commissioner of the American Athletic Conference. If Mike Oresco and those lobbying on behalf of the AAC, if they are able to pull this format off and push it through, and it looks like they will, it's going to fundamentally change college football to their betterment, to their supreme benefit. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. But this is about to go down, if it happens, as the wildest 180 in the history of college football. For the G5 crowd, think about where they were just a year ago. A year ago, when we didn't know if we were going to have a season or not, do you remember what the talk was? I can tell you in our industry and in the coaching industry and in the football industry, the talk was if we don't have a season, the big boys will struggle to survive, as is. If we don't have a season, the G5 may go extinct. Vast swaths of what you know as the G5 of college football could be done. They could be out of here. They can't afford to lose a college football season. Well, then we had a season, and all's well that ends well there. Yeah, they got some financial gaps to make up, but they survived. What if you told them then that 10 months later, you're going to have a system on the table just inches away from the goal line that could fundamentally alter the future of the G5 and give them at least one guaranteed spot at every playoff table, if not more in some years? Hats off. I don't have to approve of it, but you got to clap. You got to tip your cap to anyone able to pull that off. And so 1 year ago, the G5 is looking at possible extinction if we don't have a football season. And now they're looking at being on the verge of fundamentally changing their future. They're guaranteed one spot in this playoff based on this format. They may have more than one spot in a given year. But here's the important part, and here's why the AAC is the massive winner here, above and beyond, relatively speaking, any other conference. You're about to pump massive playoff money into that conference every year, not to mention the increased TV money that they're going to get from new deals that are struck in order to broadcast this thing to begin with. Do you guys have any idea what's about to happen? I'm not just talking to you watching the show. I'm talking to folks in the Pac-12 signing off on this, and the Big Ten, in portions of the ACC signing off on this. You're about to take a conference with programs in Dallas and Houston and New Orleans and Memphis and Cincinnati and Orlando and Tampa and Carolina, and you're about to pump a ton of money into them. Do you know what that's going to do? It's going to allow a conference with programs in very, very much every major portion of the South to finally invest in football to the degree necessary to build the infrastructure to keep premier talent at home. The only talent you've been able to survive and be superior over them because of is now going to have the pipeline shut off to you if you're in the northern portions of the ACC, if you're in portions of the Big Ten and you're not in Columbus, Ohio, if you're out west, if you're in parts of the Big 12. This is going to be horrible for you. That's why I say the huge winner here is the AAC. And if you want to zoom it in to a personal level, think about the seat Gus Malzahn's in right now. Gus Malzahn is the wizard of college football. When you want to put a face on this era, when you're looking back 20 or 30 years from now and you're telling the story, look at Gus Malzahn. All of you laughed. If you're watching on YouTube right now, look at how foolish this looks. Him getting knighted, the mascot handing him the ceremonial scepter there. Well, let me tell you what he did. He, being Gus Malzahn, found a way to beat Saban 3 times while he was at Auburn. He leveraged Auburn up against a wall and got massive money from them guaranteed after the 2017 year. Thus, they had to pay him a huge buyout when they eventually fired him. And then the UCF job opens at the most opportune time imaginable. No one saw it coming. Gus Malzahn lands the best G5 job for my money that there is. And then 15 minutes later, you get word, oh, by the way, not only do you get to live in Orlando and remove yourself and rid yourself from all that pressure in the SEC and still get paid really good money plus your buyout money and be tan year-round and be surrounded by recruits that you don't have Nick Saban breathing down your neck for, not only do you get all that, we're going to change the entire playoff format to where you're going to have a spot in the playoff now. We're going to have 12 spots. You got to win the conference. You're going to be able to get in. Maybe even if you don't win it, you're going to be able to get in. Gus Malzahn is probably the biggest beneficiary of this entire thing. And the conference that he coaches in, that being, of course, the American Athletic Conference, well above and beyond, relatively speaking, any other conference in America, is the huge winner here. They are going to overtake the Pac-12 in time if this goes through. I don't see any way around that. You cannot have that many programs in the middle of big-time recruiting markets in the South finally able to get adequate enough money pumped into their programs and into their conference to invest in football. You're not going to have all that happen and them not keep talent home. You already have seen a sneak peek of what this looks like with Billy Napier at Louisiana. When they went to play Iowa State last year, you watched it, and Iowa State, as a favorite, lost. But it didn't look like an upset. If you didn't know the point spread on the game, you'd think Louisiana was just the superior team. They looked like the better roster. Well, that's because those rosters are a lot more comparable than anyone wants to believe in the Big 12. You got a program up there in Ames, Iowa. You got one down in Louisiana. You want talent from the South, you got to fly 1,500 miles if you're Matt Campbell. You just got to throw a rock out your back window if you're Billy Napier. The only thing that has ever kept those programs from being able to ascend, and that conference from being able to ascend to what they call Power 6 level, I just call it flat out Power 5 level. They may overtake some of these folks in the Power 5, is they haven't had the finances in order. And that is a fancy way to say they ain't had the money. They're about to have the money. Then they're going to have the talent, and they're going to have the facilities, and they got all that money they need in the future to be what you are now. I don't think anyone has a clue what they're signing off on. I am stunned that you guys are letting Mike Oresco and the G5, for example, pull this off. But I'm kind of sitting over here as a bystander because, hey, you know, it's easier for me. I'm parked in Nashville. It's a lot easier for me to go cover Memphis than it is Oregon State. So my hat's off to them. If they can pull this off, that's one of the biggest coups or coups in the history of college football.